Recently, I grabbed a fat quarter bundle and started to make a hexagon quilt while my friend Anita was trying to teach live on Facebook. And the results were basically the quilt you see on the back wall. Lots of you were asking, Rob, how do you make that quilt? So are you ready? We're going to do it today. It's time. Let's get stitching. Well, welcome back everybody to Sew Well from Stitchin Heaven. I am your host, Rob Appell, and I'm super blessed to see all of you on the other side of the camera. And if you're really following the story as it has unfolded of this quilt right here, which I think we're gonna call the strip pieced tumbling blocks or tumbling block in a block, something like that, because that's what the design is. A few weeks ago, my dear friend Anita, who always does on Tuesdays on Facebook Live, 10:30 Central Time, 8:30 Pacific Time, a really cool show. We call it Coffee with Anita, and she walks through Stitchin Heaven and shows you all of the wonderful new stuff that has just arrived and maybe lets you know about a new class or program or something that's coming up. So at any rate, we had this super cool bundle of fabrics for another project, and this is called Trinkets by Alison Glass for Andover, and we had a few of them left over. And she was getting ready to go live, and I grabbed the bundle and I said, well, I don't feel like being live today. I just want to go make a project. So I started just sewing strips together with the intention of doing something like this. And then I took a few photos and we put it on the social media, and a lot of you requested a video and a pattern and all that. So forgive me, there is no pattern yet. There may be, but I really want to share with all of you how you can really just construct and go on a project. And this is a simple formula for a project, and it did start with strip pieces. I didn't necessarily plan to make a tutorial, so I don't have much left of the strip pieces, but what you see here, so this is evidence that I had made 2 of each grouping. Let me slow down. I know I had a bundle of fat quarters. I don't remember exactly how many colors or fabrics were in the bundle of fat quarters. A fat quarter is 18 inches by 22 inches. So I started kind of pairing them in value color, and then I pulled out the whites, and then you can see in some of these others all the way down to the dark grays. I was calling those the neutrals, and then we had our warm and our cool colors. So at any rate, the key to a project like this is 3 color families and trying to keep your lights on top and your mediums on one side and your darks on the other, so you get that 3D effect. Like our wonderful game, and yes, I'm about to date myself, we called it Q*bert, and I think it was somewhere between Frogger and Miss Pac-Man. It was early in the video game era, folks. It wasn't the Oregon Trail, but it was close. So at any rate, what happened here is I took these strips. Let me tell you, in case you want to make what I made, these strips, the wide ones, are 3 1/4 inches wide, and then the skinny strip is 1 1/2. You really just want to make sure you can really tell that you have wide strips and a skinny strip, because it's the skinny strip that you see here that breaks apart the small tumbling block from the large tumbling block that's with inside, or the block in the block, which adds that extra 3D perspective that we all like so much. So then back to the fat quarters, I cut down as many strips as I could from the colored ones and the neutrals, again being 3 1/4, 1 1/2, and then I made groups and pairs. And then once those were all in their strip sets, then I just went ahead and let me show you how it looked. This is an example of one that's remaining, just like this. So using what is referred to as a 60-degree ruler. This happens to be from Creative Grids, and I really like their products a lot. I was also using 60-degree off of my my Jerry template, but there weren't the lines to mark. So this is a better tool for this style project, because what you're really going to do is you're going to lay these marking lines down, and if mathematically all was correct, you would have been cutting 7-inch 60-degree triangles is what I'm trying to say, 7-inch 60-degree triangles. And so when you cut those, what you end up with are 2 different formulas, right? So these ones had the yellow tips, these ones had the pink tips. No real rocket surgery there going on. So these just became different stacks. Then I started building the quilt on the floor, and what you're looking at right here is a little more than half of the quilt project, and we're going to sew some blocks and rows together here in a few moments, but I want you to be able to see how the tumbling blocks really come together. So as I was saying earlier, I kind of have 3 different color families, and I need 2 pieces for this particular layout two pieces from each of my color groupings that are the same orientation. So I have these two with the pink tips, and I'm going to kind of pull these out in the way my eye sees these as light. Now here's my medium, two oranges that had orange and dark. See this? Both colors are a little darker, so these are both a little lighter than these. And this is where you might want to question me a little bit, and go ahead if you'd like, put it in the comments below. Rob's colorblind. I'm doing the whole video with my eyes closed today, folks. No, I'm just being silly. But yes, intensity, this is darker here, but this maybe gets lighter. But when you have a whole group of fat quarters that you've randomly mixed and matched, you may have that happen. And that's why I set aside this as a grouping, because you'll still be able to see the pattern come together. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're just going to marry up our partners, our pairs. Okay, but this was my lightest, and I'm thinking of this as kind of my top. Now these are going to go together as you see here in rows, but here's a point, here's a wide tip, here's a point, here's a wide tip. So if you're going to do your layout, here's your tip and your wide edges there. So this is the top of a row. You see, this is now the bottom of a row. So these two come together like this. And then what I like to try to do is have like my mediums on maybe that right-hand side. And then my darks would end up over here on my left-hand side. As you can see in the quilt, didn't worry a ton about whether all of the center narrower strips of fabric were the same, because in the long run, it'll actually be a backdrop quilt like this, that once it's quilted, I'm going to go ahead and put the same logo on the top and use it for our other set out in Texas. But it's random, and so in general visual, the colors are correct, and it's going to read from light all the way to dark this way, because I kind of like my light up in that upper left-hand corner for me, or that right-hand corner. It just kind of feeds down throughout the project. So we're adding on more rows over there as we go. Now, let me show you how you would assemble these, because remember, you're going to need to sew together rows first so that all of your assemblies are like this. Now, that's a little tricky because you can probably see those are half hexagons, so you're going to want to keep yourself fairly organized while you're working. And so sewing in rows, the first thing you're going to be doing is just marrying two of your triangles. And so you would go ahead and just match those. And what I'm mostly concerned about is matching up the center narrower strip. You're going to have some bias. So you can see now as we're over at the sewing machine, I have an edge guide which marks my 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm just going to go ahead and let the machine do a majority of the work, trying to keep my seam here together today right at that skinny strip union. And then one of the things I find is definitely going to be key is after each stitching is to go on over and press. So if you're like my friend Tiffany Hayes, Team Tiffany, you would go ahead and split these and press these open. For me right now, I'm just going to press in one direction. So I'm just pressing over to one side, but we do want to get our pressing done before we bring in our next piece so that the seams are accounted for. Okay, so remember, I'm working along this row here, so this is going to be the next piece that I put on. I like the bulk of my rows and all my fabric and everything laying on the feed dogs. I'm going to make any adjustment necessary now before I get over to the feed dogs and the needle to try to keep that center seam lining up. And we're just going to sew on through. So the key will be to get all of your strips made, all of your triangles cut, and then design all of it on your design wall, and then sew together your rows. Let me show you something else you may be a little concerned about, and sometimes you might feel like things are going to get a little bit wonky, and yes, we can most certainly trim if we need to across here, but you'll see that with just a little bit of adjusting, this won't be a problem at all as well. But if something like this gets a little bit worse than that, you might want to be concerned, if that makes sense, okay? So as you build your rows, you're going to get to a spot where you've got this triangular end, and we want it to be a squared off end. Now, I don't know if you can tell, but along the bottom, I've chosen the really cool dark scarab fabric, which looks like this, right? And well, here, I've got it right here. This is what we're going to use as the fill-in spots. And so I cut myself 2 rows, and this could also be a solid fabric. And if you're making up your own pattern as you go along, remember folks, all you have to do is take your triangles that you've cut and measure and see what your height is of your triangle, and then you'll just make strips that are that tall. And then once you've made your strips that tall, again, you'll go ahead and using the tip up on the tip of the fabric there, you can go ahead and cut. And I'll usually do between 2 and 4 strips with a nice sharp blade, okay? And then you can rotate your tool, line up your edge, cut again, and so on and so forth. But these are full triangles and we only want half of these. So then what I do is I stack them up, again, no more than probably 6 or 8 at a time. And now what we're going to need to do is cut these this way. And if you'll notice, I have a dotted line right through here and a straight line. I prefer to use the dotted line on the outside edge. Okay, and that's just going to give us straight, perfect straight up and down. But depending on where you slide this, right, obviously I wouldn't be cutting through the tip. So I'm just going to slide this up and I'm going to eyeball that flat, blunt tip up there so that I think I'm cutting it in half in center. And I'm going to separate 2 sides. Now, if these were prints, of course, I was cutting these in stacks, so I've got both lefts and rights. Solids, it would be the same thing. You just want to make sure you don't do anything where you're going to end up with all one direction triangle, because then you'll be frustrated. You'll have to go back and cut more. Okay, I've saved us a strip where we still need to sew these on as well, but I want to finish the quilt with all you, so let's work on the real project here, folks. This was just kind of an example we were doing. This is something that you can get turned around pretty easy. You see, this is not the appropriate orientation. So you would choose the other triangle, right? And it's going to fit in. Remember, you're building squared out long rectangular rows. So as you put this triangle in, just make sure it fits. And then overlap it right sides together. And I even found with all of the rows that I made, sometimes they were a little bit tiny, sometimes they were a little bit big with my triangle because I'm not the most accurate of quilt makers, but I've been told I'm one of the more fun quilt makers. So at any rate, we're getting it done. We're having a good time, staying warm with our quilting. Hopefully we're all learning something together as well out there. So with each row, you're going to have 2. Right? So you're going to have one for one side and then the other, if you're talking about print fabrics, will just fit on the other side. So look at this wonky. This is probably the worst seam ever, and I've saved it all for you to watch. Okay, so I'm just going to lay that over and I'm going to compensate. I've got this tip down here real nice. I'm going to let that lay over and I'm going to come on over to the machine and I'm going to let all of that just extra waste fabric hang out upside of that seam allowance guide. Stitch on through, and all the problems have gone away. It's super easy that way, folks. Okay? See? Easy peasy. I seem to have a tendency to press into the added on end piece. And for me, I normally add end pieces to each row as I'm building my project. But I was waiting because I thought this would be the ultimate fabric for us. So I ordered some extra from Stitchin Heaven and it just arrived this morning. So that's why I'm making the projects and covered in thread and stuff. So at any rate, and I've got enough, I'm going to use it for the binding as well. So one of the tricks I learned just today I'd like to share with you is no matter where I'm working at in the project, I didn't want to accidentally, because it's such a long series of seams, sew the wrong pieces together or the wrong long edges together. So up in the top corner over there and on this edge where we're not going to sew to, and on the bottom edge of this series of rows, I'm not sewing. I just put a safety pin. So that tells me that is not where we're going to sew. And so then as I have my row, I come on over here and I can start to match up. Now on the ends, it's going to go skinny point to skinny point. So I now know I need to rotate this, but I'll also be able to see that my color banks line up. Let me bring this on over so you can see all that a little bit better. I like to leave things on the ironing board because it just makes it real easy to work with. So at first I was referring to, you'll be checking that your skinny tips or your wide edges of your outer edge fabric lines up. But then you've also noticed, because of the split in the rows, that group of fabrics was together, this group of fabrics was together, but this group of fabrics had not been joined to make our 3-part series before, and we'll see that up again. So you're just spot checking to make sure you have all of your fabrics in the right orientation, because it is a long row. You don't want to have to unstitch and restitch it another time. And then from here, I'm just going to marry that point, and I'm going to watch those points and the points of the first skinny row first. And that's all I'm going to worry about. And then I'm going to align the centers, and then I'm going to align the skinny tips, and then the centers, and then I'll have a nice long straight run. And so each little group, I just do my best. There's going to be a lot of bias that will be in your favor. And the last trick I think I can share with you, and this works for a lot of quilts, is notice I'm not going to let all of the quilt hang below me, especially while I stand. I'm putting all of the weight here on the table, and that really helps keep the feed system running smooth and all my fabrics running smooth, so that I can build and add row and row as I go with this bias stretch fabric. Now, I won't say that my Handy Quilter 510 isn't a badass machine. Oops, did I say that out loud? And isn't doing a great job feeding the fabrics through. So having a great machine makes a difference as well. But I will say that having the weight hanging off the table is never good for us. All right, here we go. So just matching up each point. I try to give us a little bit bigger shot on this today so you can see that. Now we're into that long run. Make sure your fabric below doesn't go missing. So now I can just see a little bit of that green showing, the under fabric. Making up for lost time there. And again, you could just squish down like I do, kind of abuse these seam allowances. Look how nice that one just married right up. That was another one of those skinny rows, folks. Look, it just nailed it. Okay, so we're just going to go through and do all of this real quick. Okay, and as we're coming into this last skinny little row, you can see with very little effort, it's all but lined up perfectly. I mean, not 1,000%, but it's pretty darn sharp. And the bottom corners will also match up as those feed through there. So like with the edges, I do press after each row, and that also helps things stay nice and tidy as I go. So as we're wrapping up today's video, I'll go ahead and press this as we talk. Just want to remind you that I can't show you the next steps yet, but I want to talk about those next steps, which will be the quilting. So the quilting on this quilt here, because it's going to be a backdrop quilt for my show, I want it to be pretty terrific. But a lot of times when you have a tumbling blocks quilt, if you over quilt it, your eye's drawn to the quilting and you don't see the line work of the actual tumbling block. So one of the easiest things to do is to actually come in here and to stitch in lines. Actually, let's see, this will be going up and down. These are my verticals here, and then kind of these diagonals this way. And I'll probably do the same within the colors in the background and leave the white all alone, or the skinny strips all alone. Recently, I was talking with my friend Charisma Horton, who's a professional long arm quilter and pattern designer, of course, but she was recommending that you can just use a lighter neutral thread with something like this, so you're not doing constant thread changes. So I'm not sure how I feel about that yet, but I promise that I will have a picture here in just a moment for you once I pull it off the long arm and it's all ready to rock and roll. I want to hold this up so you can kind of see the effect of what we're talking about here a little bit better. So here are the last several rows, and you can see those tumbling blocks, the blocks and the blocks, and I think you can see how we're controlling the lights and the mediums and the darks by how we're trying to place each and every color. I really did use the little red boot. It's a value finder. That's the name of the tool. Stitchin Heaven has them. They're wonderful. And you hold it up against your eyes and it turns everything into black and or white, grayscale. And so you can really find where the value is. And that's how I then went around and rearranged the project. If you looked at the project originally, it was going to go this way, and now it goes this way because I do want to make it like a backdrop quilt just like this. So I've got a little more work to do to wrap this up. But I really, like I said, wanted to give you the information for the strip pieced tumbling blocks. It's such a fun and easy pattern to do. I really enjoyed starting in on it that day and selling through all of the bundles. So I don't think we have the bundles anymore, but I know we have some of the fabrics. And again, you can do this with any wonderful gradient. You could do it with just 3 to 6 colors of fabric. Do it any way you like. Do it in any different sizes you like. And just as a reminder, let your skinny strip be a skinny strip. Let your wide strips be wide strips. And then once you've created your strips, you'll know how tall to make your 60-degree triangles using something like a Creative Grids ruler, whether you're doing the strips or the solids to fill in the end. And that's all the pattern information you really need, folks. You can do this all by yourselves. I know you can. So with that said, I want to get this on the long arm, get it all stitched up, and show it off to all of you real soon. And I better get busy here. So I love seeing you all today. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I better get cracking on that long arm. Until I see you all again, folks, stay well. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. It really helps support our channel. If you haven't subscribed, do so now. Hit the little button to be notified every time we go live or do a new video for all of you. And here's one from the past I think you'll really enjoy.